Before we hit the home stretch, let's play with Legos in Lego Batman.
Computer, how do I put the Joker in Arkham Asylum? Quickest route, no freeways. Computer, do you hear me?
Hello, Master Bruce. I've just taken away your computer privileges.
Gasp.
Sir, it's time for you to stop this unhealthy behavior. You can't spend the rest of your life alone, dressed in black, and staying up all night.
Good night, Alfred.
Sir, it's morning. You need to take responsibility for your life, and it starts by raising your son.
I'm sorry. I literally have no idea what you're talking about.
The young orphan you adopted at the gala.
I thought I was being sarcastic.
Hello, secret camera.
This is the Superhero Pantheon. On this podcast, we take one superhero film a week and decide whether it should be in the Pantheon, the Pile of Shame, or somewhere in between. My name is Jerome Cuson. You can find me on Twitter at JeromeC1985. You can find additional episodes of this podcast through Apple Podcasts, Stitcher, Spotify, and all of your favorite podcast apps. Through the real world, we strongly encourage you to leave a 4 or 5 star review so as to help people discover this show and the great work that the folks at The Real World are doing. If you would like to interact with us or send feedback, you can do so in 2 ways. First, send an email to superheropantheon@gmail.com. Second, find us on Twitter at Hero Pantheon. My co-host for this week and every week will be Brian DeBrain. He can be found on Twitter at Brian DeBrain. Brian, we have put 4 consecutive movies into the superhero pantheon at this point, going all the way back to Batman Mask of the Phantasm and all 3 of the Christopher Nolan directed Batman films. I don't think that streak is going to continue, Brian, but you had a really good way of describing this movie.
Yeah, this is pretty much just a love letter to Batman, and I know a lot of the jokes will probably be over the heads of a bunch of kids, but the parents that took their kids to this movie probably had a great time as well. But this movie still had a lot of elements for kids, so I think it's for both. And I think over time, I think this will be loved even more over time. It's just going to take some time for generations to pass it down. But, I mean, this has 90 years worth of history of Batman all over it, from the TV shows to the movies to the comics to the animated series, all over the place. And you just can't help but smile from beginning to end when watching this movie, and I had a smile again on my face from start to finish.
Right, there are a lot of deep cuts in this movie. I mean, this is a film that has Egghead in it. It has Billy D. Williams playing Two-Face finally after about 28 years. So there are a lot of deep cuts, and that's kind of what the notes as we talk about this movie, that's what we're going to be discussing, some of the deep cuts that are involved with this film. Unlike the Nolan movies, there really isn't a whole lot to talk about in this section. But let's get started. So Batman's first line in the beginning action scene, "You want to get nuts? Let's get nuts," is, of course, a reference to the 1989 Batman film, where Michael Keaton's Bruce Wayne says this line to Jack Nicholson's Joker. Speaking of the 1989 Batman, as I just mentioned, Billy D. Williams voiced the nefarious Two-Face in this movie. Williams portrayed Two-Face's good alter ego Harvey Dent. In Batman, he was very eager to also portray Two-Face, but did not get the chance to do so, but he did get to do so here. One more note on voices. The voice of Bane is not done by Tom Hardy, but it is done by someone who sounded a lot like Tom Hardy in this case, as they mirrored his cadence and his accent. The voice was done by Doug Benson, a stand-up comedian and podcaster who has done his comedic impression on Hardy's Bane since The Dark Knight Rises was released. The directors were fans of Benson's podcast and hired him based on that. So, 2 very different stories as it relates to the voice of the villains.
I'm just so happy they brought in Billy D. Williams. It's such a redemption moment. Even though he only had a few little lines here and there, it was still like a mind-blowing thing. I didn't see it coming. I didn't look at the cast list too much. But the first time I hear his voice, in the theater, I marked out so hard because I knew That's a super deep cut, and he deserved that moment.
Definitely. And of course, the major voice of this movie is Will Arnett playing Batman. Will Arnett appeared for the first time as Batman in the 2014 Lego Movie, a movie that exploded onto the scene as one of the most popular films of 2014. In a lot of ways, it was kind of an early breakout for Chris Pratt, and it is a film that I know a lot of people enjoy, both adults and children. It also has one of the best earworm songs of all time, and This Is Awesome, where everything is awesome. And unfortunately, I don't think the sequel nearly measured up to the original Lego Movie, but this is definitely one of those movies, like so many that these producers are involved with. On paper, it should not work, just like 21 Jump Street, just like 22 Jump Street, just like Solo. And you can see that which movies worked. The Lego Movie, 21 Jump Street, 22 Jump Street worked, and then they get pulled off of Solo, and Solo turns out to be a creative meh, I guess is the best way to describe it. But the original Lego Movie was a phenomenon, and based on Will Arnett's performance as Batman, people were hungering for this spin-off.
The crazy thing too is that the Lego animated universe already had its own little thing going, but it was like straight to DVD for kids and stuff. So I think what came out of nowhere is this like love for this character to make its own movie, but people didn't realize he already had his own movie, but it was like a kids version. So it's just weird that like there was this demand for a Lego universe, even though it's already out there. But I like how there's this like branching out, a theatrical, more PG-13 type audience. You know what I mean? Even for some of the jokes. But it's just weird that there's a parallel, universe out there with the whole animated universe. There's a Superman movie, I think. There's a Green Lantern movie, I think. A Justice League movie, I think. All for kids. But now all of a sudden there's this like alternate theatrical universe I thought was really cool. Like I'm a big fan of the Lego movie as well. Um, the big thing for me is like it's just the one. It feels like it was only meant to be a one-time thing because once the cat's out of the bag, that it's revealed at the end. Spoiler alert: that humans are in control and it's a father-son story and blah blah blah, and you see the real Will Ferrell and all. Once the cat's out of the bag on that, I feel you can't do that magic again, and that's why the sequel didn't work. So I was worried that at the end of this movie, that like someone special from the Batman universe would come out and be the one controlling the Legos at the end. Like I don't know, maybe Billy D. Williams or maybe even Tim Burton would pop out at the end. Luckily, they didn't do that and they avoided that. So this kind of created its own sub Batman universe, which I like.
And just a couple more things to point out. Many people thought this would be nominated for an Academy Award for Best Animated Feature, but just like the Lego Movie, it did not and was snubbed. And I know what you're thinking. What was nominated instead? The Boss Baby, a movie that everyone remembers, right?
Don't get me started. I feel like every time Batman deserves a Best Picture nomination, whether it's the Best Picture or Best Animated, they get skipped over because he's Batman.
That is unfortunately the case. Of course, Alfred uses the Batman costume from Batman 1966 to stop the destruction of Gotham City. That is a real deep cut, because I believe that Alfred did suit up as Batman in that original 1966 TV series as well.
I think so. I might have seen it already, but like I said, I've only seen like the first two seasons. I'm sure that happened in the wacky season 3 where everything went off a cliff and, they had Batgirl and everything.
When Batman arrives at the Fortress of Solitude and presses the doorbell, the sound is the main theme of Superman, composed by John Williams, a great Easter egg. There's a couple of Superman related Easter eggs, including one that I definitely did not notice.
Yeah, okay, so this was a really deep cut that like I had to pay attention to. So Terrence Stamp does a brand new cameo line in this movie. It wasn't just a recorded piece from like, the 78 footage or whatever. Like when Batman gets the Phantom Zone gun or whatever, and then he has to go open up the crystal thing or whatever, and he hears Jor-El's voice, Superman's father. It's the voice of Terrence Stamp reading the lines of Marlon Brando. So you were expecting Marlon Brando, instead you got Terrence Stamp reading the lines as Jor-El. It was amazing.
I believe that Terrence Stamp played Jor-El on Smallville.
Really? So now it's even okay. Now I get it. That's even better. It's like an Easter egg within an Easter egg, and I just had my mind blown live on this podcast.
Well, we were talking about Christopher Nolan. I guess you could say it's like a version of Inception, if you will.
Even better.
Director Chris McKay originally wanted to include several villains from R-rated films among the Phantom Zone prisoners, but he was forced to drop them as they were deemed inappropriate. I can understand. When I read this list, you're going to understand why they were all deleted. Bill from Kill Bill, Annie Wilkes from the 1990 film Misery, and Bill the Butcher Cutting from Gangs of New York. I think the only appeal to this is getting Daniel Day-Lewis to possibly reprise this role. If he did this, this would be his greatest moment. And yes, I am aware of the Academy Awards he's won, but getting Daniel Day-Lewis to voice Bill the Butcher in a Lego Batman movie is one of those ideas that I can't just help but laugh at.
See, you're thinking too clearly because in this universe, you got to cast someone that's kind of related in the universe, but not the actual person. Like Voldemort was not voiced by Ray Fiennes in this movie, right? Ray Fiennes actually voices Alfred, but Voldemort is in this movie. So in this case, if Bill the Butcher were to come back, I would have had Leo DiCaprio voice him.
Which is funny because Leonardo DiCaprio was considered to be the Riddler for one of the Christopher Nolan movies. So the irony is very deep in this. And there is a burial, just a straightforward murdering of Suicide Squad, a movie that we will be reviewing in just a couple of weeks. At one point, Batman agrees to work with the others to stop the Joker. The cast offer to help Batman, and he replies, "What am I going to do? Get a bunch of criminals together to fight the criminals? That's a stupid idea." Nice burial there, Chris McKay.
Yeah, I'm surprised this kind of got in the movie because this was less than a year than Suicide Squad released. I was it? I think it was, right? Like it was less than a year actually, and I don't know. I just feel like, man, that was such a cheap shot, but I think some people would get it, but I don't know. That movie made a lot of money, so for less than a year, kind of a cheap shot, I think.
I'm not sure. Have you seen Suicide Squad? I don't know if it's a cheap shot.
Yeah, but that's such a like I don't know. That's so inside baseball because like this is a kids movie, and I don't know if kids can even tell if Suicide Squad's a bad movie. I don't even think kids watch Suicide Squad, but it made a lot of money, which I think it did with adults. So we'll see. I don't know. It feels like a cheap shot to me.
It is inexplicable to me how much that movie made. We'll talk about that in a couple weeks. But there are some pot shots that are taken in some of these animated movies. It's not just the Lego Batman movie, but even in some of the DCU movies, there's some clear pot shots that are taken at the DCEU. And it's really funny to watch because there is a clear tension that exists between these folks that are doing the animated work and some of the people that are in charge of the live action. There's a lot of tension that exists there, and I'd be very curious to give all these folks some truth serum and find out what they really think. Because Teen Titans Go, a movie that we are going to review at some point, that is also a movie that takes a lot of pot shots at various DC properties, including the Green Lantern and including some of the Batman movies as well.
Yeah, I'm actually looking forward to that one because I've seen actual episodes of Teen Titans Go, and yeah, they do take these weird, cheap shots, but it's weird because like there's this line, you know what I mean? Like, do kids even realize? Do smart kids even realize? But then again, like, who's watching these cartoons? Is it more adults? Is it more kids? Is it more of both? So you always got to find that fine line, and that's kind of where the jokes kind of lie in a movie like this, and that's where you kind of have to be, divisive, I guess.
Right, and I think it's worth noting when we talk about Teen Titans that the show, I actually don't like the show, but I really enjoyed the movie, and there's very clearly a disconnect there, but we will talk more about that when we talk about Teen Titans. Let's get to the categories. First, talk about the heroes. This is a movie that's 1 hour and 44 minutes, and I really feel like this movie still could have lost at least a good 15 to 20 minutes because the story is fairly simple. It's a fairly A to B. There's not a lot of twists and turns in this. Essentially, in this film, Batman has to learn to not be a lone jerk because that's what he is for most of the movie. And basically, he has to realize at the end that he needs a family, that he needs help. And you've referred to this as the best Batman-Robin relationship that has ever been portrayed in a movie. It's really hard to disagree with you. Basically, Robin is precocious. He's much younger. This is something that I think we've discussed is very hard to do in a live-action movie, but having Michael Cera play a young Robin is a good idea here because I think it just works out. When you're doing a kids movie and you put a kid in it who's precocious, I think it's much easier for them to identify with the film. I do like Barbara Gordon. She basically is right most of the time, like all women are. I think that's just a fact. I think Alfred is kind of a fun foil. Ray Fiennes does a really good job as the voice. And I would almost be curious to see him actually play the role of Alfred in a Batman movie because I think he could do a really good job with it.
I was thinking the exact same thing. Like, even when I saw this in 2017 in the theaters, I was thinking like, God, because at the time I know that they still had Jeremy Irons, and he was probably still in line to play him at the time. But goddamn, if with this new Batman movie coming out and you want to redo everything, he's the perfect guy to do it. He's at that right age to do it. He's got the accent. He okay, so he plays M in the Bond movies, right? And he does a great job in that as like this veteran elder statesman with like military whatever kind of training. He fits that role perfectly, and you can kind of hear it in his voice, like he gives it that that Alfred kind of feel to it. And his performance is great in this movie, and him just being that supportive kind of figure, embracing that father role, and then Batman himself embracing the father role. He's forcing him to do it when he accidentally adopts Robin. I thought that's just so cute and funny for this kind of movie, and they're embracing this idea of him being a father, which I've never like. This is the first time in all the movies that they're kind of saying like dad, calling him dad. And the only time they really do this is like we mentioned in the DC animated universe, where they have right now Damian as a son, who's actually his Robin right now in that universe. So I like that they went in that direction. It makes sense. It's relatable, and kids will definitely latch onto that idea. And then, of course, the great idea of him being an orphan as well. I mean, that's the origin story of Batman, him being an orphan, so that's relatable. I love all that stuff. Barbara Gordon is great. I think it's Rosario Dawson. She does a great job as the voice, Barbara Gordon. Nice little little more jabs and nods there. Where like you mentioned that Batman, they mentioned Batman has been doing this for 90 years, making him well over 100 years old. And Barbara Gordon mentions her as a child worshiping Batman, and then Batman like having this thing for Barbara Gordon, even though he's probably like 100 years older than her in this universe. It's just crazy little things like that that kind of make you think like, wow, this is so meta, this is so crazy. But it's still fun, you know what I mean? So all those little things combined, and Bruce Wayne being this asshole, and Batman being an asshole, and that kind of thing, and just wanting to be alone, and being just angry, and like just using his anger and channeling his anger. It's great. I love the way they interpret it.
I love the way that they parody what Zack Snyder's vision of Batman is. Essentially, I don't think they were doing this consciously, but that's how it comes across. You saw a little bit of it in the Lego Movie, but here they really get to expand upon it. And I really like Will Arnett as Batman. I think he's tremendous when he does the voices in animated works. I think him as BoJack Horseman is probably some of the best work that I've ever seen him in, which is funny because the live action stuff he's done lately, the Ninja Turtles movies, the fourth and fifth season of Arrested Development, whatever his Netflix sitcom is called, have not been good. But I think he works out really well here as Batman. And I think, talking about him specifically, I think what he's able to do is he's able to really convey the humor of the situation. Like, it's very clearly dark, but he's able to make it funny and make it amusing and make it palpable. And again, I think it's really interesting that he also does something very similar in BoJack Horseman. He takes his very tragic character and is able to bring a lot of humor to it. And I give him a lot of credit for being able to do that in a movie and with a character that it's not always easy to do that. And typically when they've gone the lighter route, they have not made Batman nearly as dark. Like if you watch Batman Brave and the Bold or the 1966 version, Batman is not this dark. But here he's very clearly intended to be dark and alone and very much into himself, and I think they did a very good job with that here.
Also, I like the little things of like him writing his own music and writing really dark metal music. That's a nice little touch. I like that they added that because like the music that he kind of wrote, that's such a song that Batman would write. You know what I mean? Like that was such a perfect touch. But I do have like one criticism is that like the problem with Will Arnett and his vocal performances is by the end when you're seeking kind of redemption from his character, his voice is kind of hard to like relate. What's the word I'm looking for? Kind of connect with towards the end, and you're trying to relate to him emotionally, but because he's such an asshole, it's hard to do that. So that's kind of the problem with this Batman character. Is like it's great that he's this loner asshole, but by the end of the movie, when you're kind of finding that redemption for him, it's hard to do that because he's still such an asshole.
Right. I think the tone of this movie is probably what hurts it for me. That's why I'm only giving this a 7 because while I really like the first 2/3 of this movie, and I think there are some issues with the ending, and I think there are just some issues with the movie generally feeling too long. So I definitely appreciate what this film is trying to do, but ultimately I think this is just short of being considered something I would call pantheon level on the heroes.
Yeah, I'm gonna go with a 7 as well, and that's just kind of my criticism is that like by the end, Batman is still this asshole, and it's hard to like feel sorry for him, kind of thing. But you're kind of rooting for the rest of his members of his family.
And from the villain's perspective, but what basically the other element of this movie is the Joker wants to be considered Batman's number one villain, and Batman refuses to acknowledge that. And of course, this is something that has been in the lore. It's something that is even referenced in the 2008 Dark Knight when Joker says, I think we are destined to do this forever. And what you get here is you get a Joker who is much more light. And he is basically not the Joker that you are seeing in 1989 or 2008 or even in the animated series. He is basically there for fun. And it's funny that Zach Galifianakis is the person that they chose to voice this. What an eclectic career this man has had if you look at the fact that he did the Hangover movies and collected some enormous paychecks for both of those sequels. And now he's just doing his own thing on Baskets, a TV show on FX. And here he's just kind of playing the Joker, kind of relatively normal and not weird. So I think it works for the most part, but again, I think the ending, it doesn't quite work because the Joker is supposed to be a Batman villain, and by the end there really are no villains. And I like that they basically use all of the others as filler in this case, and they even incorporate some super-powered villains. Like you said, they bring in Voldemort, they bring in Sauron from Lord of the Rings, they bring in the agents from The Matrix. And I think it's really fun and enjoyable. And I think the idea of having Batman interact with the Gremlins, I mean, that's why you would go to see something like this, or go see something like the Lego Movie, or even Ready Player One, to see those funny character interactions. And especially with animation, those are the things that you get to do. So I'm kind of mixed on the villains in some ways, but I definitely appreciated what they were going for with the Phantom Zone.
Yeah, I thought that was a cool concept, and seeing King Kong as well. And it's funny, we see King Kong in this and Ready Player One. And also, King Kong had his own movie in 2017, so like you saw King Kong in three different movies in less than a year on screen. Just that was kind of cool. Yeah, I just feel like they kind of shortchanged the actual Batman villains. They kind of just made fun of them, and I was like, oh man, why you gotta do that? Like kind of like make them like clowning them, literally calling them like just people in clowns and cosplay or whatever they called them, and made fun of them, and therefore the Joker has to go to the Phantom Zone and get more badass villains to help him out. I was fully expecting like the Justice League to come and help Batman at the end, but instead they just had the villains do that team up thing with him and do the whole Suicide Squad joke within the joke. So I thought that was kind of interesting. I wanted the Justice League to come in and kind of help him out, but they also did the joke of the Justice League rejecting Batman because he's an asshole and they don't want to party with him. So I thought that was kind of funny as well. But the villains, I just feel like Joker was not. I don't know. Like it seemed. Maybe you're right. A little too normal in a performance for him. It didn't seem so Jokerish, but I do like the take on it. I just didn't like the way that they kind of just shortchanged the actual Rogues Gallery. I thought they kind of took him for granted, which kind of sucks because I thought I was going to get more out of Billy D. Williams and more out of the Bane voice, but we just kind of saw him at the beginning and that was it, and then they came back at the end. And then, I kind of wanted more out of those supervillains from the Phantom Zone. I wanted more out of them. Like, I wanted more of the more villains total, but I guess they were just kind of limited with the time and the animation space and whatever. So, and I get more of that in Ready Player One a year later anyway. So that's kind of that void that was missing in my life of like interactive characters from different movies coming in and just kind of kicking each other's asses. And I got that with Ready Player One. But in this case, I'm gonna go with a 6 out of 10. I just feel like they could have done more with the villains, but I guess a lot of the focus was just more on like the Batman relationship with Robin and the whole family thing, and Joker was just kind of there to kind of bring everything together, and I guess the Phantom Zone was just kind of like a nice nod to Superman as well.
I am also going to go with the 6 here. I think that it's kind of a mixed bag, and when you mentioned that this was a love letter to Batman, in a way, I think it functions much more as that than as an actual movie, if that makes sense. And we could talk about this when we talk about the story, but ultimately I don't think that a lot of the villain stuff totally works. And I get what they were trying to go for. They were trying to go for kind of a high action sequence, and it's really hard to do that with the Batman Rogues Gallery. But just shoehorning in some of the other villains, I think it was a little bit too much because Batman is generally regarded as having the best rogues gallery of any superhero out there. I mean, you can go 5 to 10 deep with high quality villains with the Penguin and the Riddler, Two Face, their tragic backstories, and just some of the things that they were able to do. And unfortunately, you really don't get any of that here, as the focus is so much on Batman and his relationship to his surrogate family, and then with Batman and the Joker. From a storytelling standpoint, this is very much a meta Batman story that references nearly every iteration of the character and has every member of the Rose Gallery plus the Phantom Zone. This is much less about serving as a Batman story, but serving as kind of this love letter that can be enjoyed by younger kids and by adults. I don't know how kids even get half the references in this movie.
That's what I'm saying too. It's like over time, I think this will be more appreciated, and I don't know if that'll hurt the legacy score because right now it feels like this kind of got overlooked in the last couple of years. But at the same time, like I mean, they had the goddamn Wonder Twins in this movie. You know what I mean? Like that's a deep cut to like the Super Friends from when I was a kid. You know what I mean? And I don't even know if the Super Friends are even a thing now. So like, or not even the Wonder Twins. You know what I mean? Like Jesus Christ, just all these obscure references, but at the same time, like it's just that Batman Robin relationship just knocks it out of the park for me because I was just like, damn, they really got to the heart of it, and I appreciate that. But then again, it's like the way that they approach the third act. Like it is too long because at some point I thought, okay, here comes the big finale, but it's just kind of like a 15-minute delay until the finale. So they definitely had like 15 minutes too long because it kind of felt like Batman went from being, oh, I don't want a family, I don't want help, to having help, and then not wanting having help again, and then pushing him away again, and then having to get him back again. You could have just went back to the original one and just cut out 10 to 15 minutes, but they needed to make that theatrical cut feel a little more and add more oomph to the third act. And the third act also kind of went a little too long with the villain attacks at the end. It was cool to see the Daleks, so that was really cool. Google that because I don't want to explain it. It's a Doctor Who reference. It's a long history, but yeah, just a little too long at the end. But the first, I mean, the acts 1 and 2, fantastic. Just Act 3, it just kind of takes too long to get where it wants to go.
I think with these movies, it is really hard to come up with a good ending because I think the Lego movie struggled with that as well to ultimately come up with a resolution to all of this because you set up all this madness, and in a lot of ways, the beginning of these movies are almost much more interesting and much more fun to watch than the endings, and I think that's been true for all three of the Lego movies that exist. I think the setup and the world building in a lot of ways is much more fun than what actually happens at the end. So for those reasons, my story score, just like the villain score, is also a 6.
I'm gonna go with a 7 just because the whole concept of the idea of the story, bringing all these different elements, coming up with all the Easter eggs and jokes. I mean, that takes a lot of time in within itself, and to come up with the whole relationship building with the family and everything that I loved. So I got to give credit where credit's due. It's just that the final battle just kind of took too long.
I think the one place that I definitely want to reward this movie in a big way is with the technical aspects of it, because this movie looks fantastic. And again, you have to put this in the context of this is a Lego movie, so you have to think of it that way. There are so many tremendous visual cues. It's almost too much at certain points, but this is one of those movies where if you rewatch it and you pause, you are going to find so much on the screen, especially when they do the various flashbacks to the different movies. If you pause it and you just look at some of the details, the fact that Batman's suit literally matches with the respective films that they're referencing, that's the kind of detail work that I think is really rewards fans and rewards people who pay attention to superhero cinema as we do. And I also think just the amount of characters, the amount of villains, the deep cuts, as you brought up the Wonder Twins, and bringing in Egghead, and bringing in so many of these villains, I think it really works out well from a technical perspective. Also from a technical perspective, I really love the design of the Batcave, and really just illustrating how lonely he is. I love the fact that he still wears his cowl as he is also wearing a robe. That's a really good detail. just a lot of tremendous visuals. I think the score, I think if the score is very clearly meant to honor previous Batman scores, I think it's generally fine. But the visuals of this movie are so, so good. It is a delight to see this movie, and the amount of effort it should be rewarded. And I think this movie is almost worth seeing just for that. So for those reasons, I'm giving this an 8.
I'm gonna go one higher and give it a 9, only because the original songs for this movie really hit the heart of these characters. Man, you listen to the Robin song with the little kid singing it. I forget the title off the top of my head, but it just sounds like a song written by a kid who wants to have a family, who's in an adopted home, and he just wants to find a dad or mom. And that's exactly what the heart of the Robin character gets to be once his family dies, right? And then it's the same thing with Bruce when he sings that dark metal song. It's like they get to the heart of the characters even with the original songs, and that's like such a Disney move to do that I didn't expect that because we're just so used to like the score of these Batman movies and not really like the songs. Not even like the last time that they had good original songs probably that were related to the movies, probably like the Prince one from '89, not including "Kiss from a Rose" because that wasn't even part of the movie technically, just the credits, but like incorporating it into the movie. So I thought that was kind of like a really cool thing they did. So plus the visuals, plus everything else, and all the little Easter eggs and stuff like that. It's a 9 out of 10. It would have been a 10 out of 10 if they would have been in like in space and just expanded and did even more crazy shit. But it was cool that I think that they had like a reference to the Justice League thing in space as well. So the spaceship. So all those little things combined, it was really cool.
I think the editing of this movie, which I think is generally stellar, but I think the fact that this movie is too long, I think hurts the score just enough for me, and that's why I was unwilling to go higher than an 8. But from a visual perspective, definitely, this is the best aspect of it. The legacy score is very difficult to assess because I think it's really fun, but I kind of think it's mostly been forgotten. And I think that one of the issues with this is that it is related to the Lego franchise. And the fact that the second Lego movie did not do nearly as well as the first one, I think hurts the legacy of this movie as well. Because it kind of feels like the Lego dry is already that well is dry, so to speak. And I appreciate the meta aspects and I appreciate what they were trying to do, but it just doesn't feel like after the first Lego movie, after this movie, it's really tough to see where they go from here besides what you mentioned earlier about some of the straight to home video releases.
Yeah, that's kind of where I'm at too. I feel like in 10 years this might get more traction down the line and spread around like looking at Batman Begins, right? If we were to do a legacy score 2 years after the fact, I think it would hinder a little bit, maybe on a couple points. So it's going to be hard to say because I think over time this will be kind of growing in like, the family libraries, and I think it's going to pick up some steam down the line. It could be one of those hot streaming movies that becomes really like streamed around once Warner Brothers goes on that HBO streaming platform or whatever it's going to be combined, and everything's going to be on that DC Warner Brothers platform. So we'll see. Um, right now, I'm going to give it a 6 just because of the whole thing with the Oscars and not getting its recognition. And because of that, I think it kind of hurt its overall legacy not getting that nomination because I felt like it was definitely one of the top animated movies of 2017. And for that shit to happen with the Boss Baby crap, kind of hurt it. And the fact that you're right, the Lego thing, it's kind of getting stale already. And I think that's because once you reveal, like I mentioned before, the ending of the first one and the first Lego movie that it's just humans stuff like that, it kind of takes away from the magic. And to do it again and again, that's why I'm glad they left out the humans in this one. But of course they brought it back for the Lego sequel. But it definitely feels like they need to retool the formula a little bit. I don't think they can do another movie like this because you definitely can't do a Superman movie like this because it's just going to feel more of the same. So I think this was like a one and done, and I don't know what they're going to do next because there's actually another Lego movie that came out in the last couple of years that came out in like in September of 20, I want to say 2017, Ninjago or something like that, and that was a big flop. So that's another thing that kind of hurt the Lego franchise legacy as well.
My score for the legacy, I don't believe I said it, was a 5. My total score is a 32.
Mine is a 35. It sounds kind of high, but that's just because the visuals and stuff like that really elevated the score by a couple points. So, it's good in that mid-level range, and it's definitely worth checking out. It's like a very good movie, not Pantheon level, but still great to check out. And like we said, it's for all the Batman fans out there, and it's written for them, and it's just 95 minutes, well, an hour and 40, but of good, nostalgia and just remembering everything that you love about Batman from past, present, and probably future.
I really enjoy the aspects of this movie where if you pause, you can get a lot of visual delight. So, in a way, I think this movie is perfect for streaming. It's perfect for home video, a lot more so than even seeing it in the theaters when you can miss so much. With all of that in mind, the total score is a 67, 13 points short of Pantheon. So the streak is over. And I don't think we'll be putting any more Batman movies into the pantheon from here on. But before we talk about what's coming up next week, let's get to the burning questions. Brian, question one: was the movie too meta?
No, because I think it's just like we said, the love letter. You have to incorporate all these different elements from the 90-year history. So, even mentioning the fact that him being on a Batman for 90 years, even meaning he's over 100 years old in this movie, like it's a joke within a joke within a joke. So, is it too meta? Maybe, but I think it's just the right amount for the fans like us. And I still think kids enjoy it because they got the little jokes and, like the stuff with Robin was great to connect with.
I think this movie, in a way, is a little bit too meta in that I think it hurts the quality of the story that they're trying to tell and kind of the message that they're trying to get across. I'm not sure if that comes across all the way. In a way, maybe it does more for the kids because they are paying less attention to the Easter eggs and some of the things that we are paying attention to. So perhaps for kids, this works better because they are able to focus on the story. Do you want to see a sequel? I certainly don't, especially by the end of this movie. I think it really works well as a one and done, but if they try to do a sequel, or even if they try to do a Justice League version that is not straight to home video, I don't think it works.
No, one and done. It doesn't need a sequel, and I don't even want to see another Lego type movie after seeing Lego Movie 2. So we'll see where this franchise kind of goes and drifts into where it needs to be. It could be done in the theaters for now, but they definitely need to come up with a new kind of formula because even I'm so glad they didn't have any adults in this movie, revealing it was just some kids playing at the end because that would have really ruined it for me.
Your favorite Easter egg? Mine is Egghead. I've mentioned it multiple times. Just seeing him and seeing how close it looked to Vincent Price as a Lego was a treat.
Okay, it's kind of a tie. One is the Condiment King because I didn't think that was real. I googled it; it is real. That's just like a real deep cut. And then it's tied with the fact that Billy D. Williams got to play Two Face, which is just a great feeling, knowing that some kind of redemption can happen for shitty Hollywood stories that kind of happen to him.
I am also by the fact that we have done this podcast and we have not mentioned that Mariah Carey is the voice of the mayor in this movie.
What?
Yep, that is a true fact. Go look it up right now. That is true.
Holy shit!
While we get to that, I am going to say a favorite voice performance. I think my favorite voice performance is Will Arnett as Batman. I think he ultimately carries the movie in a way. You could certainly make the case for Ray Fiennes and perhaps even Michael Cera as Robin, but I really do appreciate Will Arnett's voiceover work, and I think he's very good here as Batman.
Yeah, I'll go with Ray Fiennes just because it made me want to see him in a live Alfred performance, and I just pictured it in my head. Whether he's dressed like Jeremy Irons or he's dressed like the '90s version of Alfred, either way, I want it, man. And him and the Batman coming up, I think that would work perfectly. But we'll see. Let's see if fate, does the right thing.
All right, and next week we are going to be reviewing Batman vs. Superman: Dawn of Justice. What is your dread level for reviewing this movie?
You know what? Not so bad. I'll go with a 3 because I am not so much of a hater of this movie. I think a lot of people will be shocked at my scores next week. Yeah, I like Ben Affleck as Batman a lot, and I might die on a hill on that, and I might die alone. But god damn it, him as a pissed off old Batman, Bruce Wayne in his 50s, I loved it.
Well, we are going to have quite a lot to say then about this because I don't necessarily disagree with your Ben Affleck assertions, but the idea of this movie being regarded as good is borderline offensive to me. My dread level is at about a 7 or 8 because I was miserable watching this movie in theaters, and I'm going to be miserable watching it once again.
We'll find out because I watched this movie 3 times in theaters, and yeah, I didn't dread it each time. It's not like where I watched Last Jedi like 4 times in theaters, where each time it got worse and worse and worse. In this case, it was just the same, the same, the same.
If we ever do a Last Jedi podcast, it might be the last podcast that we ever do because Brian and I think this is literally, if we were to do it on the scale, this is literally a movie where it might go into my pantheon and go into Brian's pile of shame.
Not the pile of shame, just, the mid level of whatever.
All right, so next week we are reviewing Batman vs. Superman. For Brian, my name is Jerome. Thank you so much for listening this week.
Oh, we forgot to mention the shark thing. They got shark repellent in this movie, the bad shark repellent. My God.